I think what we've seen is that working class Americans want a clear champion, and there is nothing radical about moral clarity in 2018.
July 11th, 2018. I just moved into a new place in the southwest part of the valley. It's right near Summerlin South here in Clark County, Nevada. And I wanted to take this time to talk about a woman who just recently won for her seat in Congress. And her name is Alexandria Ocasio. I believe that's what it's pronounced. And one of the things is that there has been a lot of excitement and there has been a lot of frustration coming from all sides. And a lot of people have posted images about her exaggerating things and overreacting, and some people think this is a step forward. So what is really the truth about Alexandria? Well, I can tell you that overall, like a lot of people running for office, it's a mixed bag. Okay, now the big question is, first of all, is how did she win? Now, we have had so-called of these alternative Democrat candidates, or I guess you could say they can fall along the Green Party. And one of the things is that we had somebody like Amy Vilela and Ruben de Silva that run here in Southern Nevada, and both of them lost. Amy Vilela lost in a large margin. Ruben did not. And by the way, the person that won Amy's district is Horsford. And this is a proof that identity politics is very flawed, because one of the reasons he won was because not only his campaign donations, but of course he was black. I believe that's why. But anyway, based on that, it's very shocking to see how did this woman win. And she won about like 57% of the vote. So it seems like that people in New York State are sick and tired of the establishment Democrats. They want something different, and believe it or not, it was kind of a pretty shocking. Now, one of the things that I've seen around Facebook and YouTube is that they kind of mock her looks. You know, they kind of make her look like she's a zombie, the way she smiles, the way her eyebrows is, and believe it or not, I think she's a very good-looking woman. I think she's quite attractive, and frankly, you know, I have a preference towards Hispanic women. Sometimes I think they're better than whites and blacks and Asians and so forth. So I really don't see what's up with her look. I think she looks very nice. But overall, I may not agree with every one of her issues, but she is less flawed than the typical establishment Democrats, believe it or not. And why is that? Well, let's talk about the pros and the cons and even the mediocre aspects of this woman. Now, let's talk about the pros, okay? And one of the pros is that, as far as I know, she didn't get any large contributions from large corporations, Wall Street banks, and so forth. And so it seems like she's largely self-funded or got a lot of personal donations. And of course, she is for campaign finance reform. And one of the issues about this new judge that's coming along, this judge that Donald Trump is actually appointing, is the fact that it's likely that this new judge is not going to overturn Citizens United. And I do want Citizens United to be overturned. I do want public financing of elections. I think this is just disgraceful. You know, one of the reasons why we don't get really good candidates nationally is because of Wall Street. And one of the reasons why we don't get good candidates here in Las Vegas is because we have these casino real estate developers and mining guys that run the whole show. And of course, it seems like we're going to really get an illusion of choice regardless of a lot of the races that we get. Okay? And that makes me think I really just don't want to vote, believe it or not. But she's for campaign finance reform, overturning Citizens United. And by the way, this new judge, what I really enjoy, and there was a protest at Dean Heller's office, and I pointed out that I'm pretty much excited about this new judge because he's going to hopefully tackle immigration. But we'll get to that later. Now, the other thing about this woman that I like, she wants to protect seniors, protect Social Security, Medicare. I don't think Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. I think Medicare Part D has kind of been wasted, and I think we can do some reforms to it. But then again, there are some people that want to cut it. And a lot of that, and they want to hijack Social Security and give it to Wall Street. Then another bright thing about Alexandria. She's against the military-industrial complex, the wars, and everything else. Bring our troops home. I'm really, really for that. And that's a good argument people make about giving people health care and college tuition, because it's better we spent on those than to actually spend bombing other countries. And seriously, these wars have just been going on for decades. So it just really has got to stop. Now, a really bright part, I think the brightest part about this woman actually, is her support for Wall Street regulation. And I think a lot of you guys are supposed to really understand that it was the deregulation of Wall Street that was simply caused by lobbying, which led to the 2008 major financial crisis, believe it or not. And that was the main cause, along with the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates. And one of the things is that I do believe we have to bring back Glass-Steagall and maybe other regulations. See, this is where the Democrats get it right. Sometimes regulation does help. But a lot of the regulations they bring on does more harm than good, especially on small businesses. But my point is that we need to bring back Glass-Steagall. We need to separate investment banks. And one of the main causes of the current overvalued housing markets is that a lot of the problems have not been solved. And this is my concern with Donald Trump. Is he going to bail out the too big to fail? Because we have to stop that. Okay? Our economy is not a rigged casino. So, and I believe she also wants to tax Wall Street speculation, and that sounds very, very reasonable. Not to mention, she also wants a postal banking system. And there have been many studies tried about that, an alternative to this fractional reserve banking system, and that's a really plus start. So basically, when it comes to corporate power, I think where the left really does well. Now, let's get to the parts where the left really doesn't do well. And by the way, she has not even mentioned the Federal Reserve, which I think is very important. Now, this is where I think that it's not as great, although not as horrible. She wants Medicare for all. Okay, now, I have seen people from Europe tell me, well, Medicare for all has benefits, it's certainly better than the system we have here. And I can understand that. The cost per capita is less. But then again, people are forcibly have to pay for some things that they don't want to pay, they may not even use. And our taxes are going to have to go up. And again, this is one of the things, because we have the public school system, it's a mess. So how can we believe that Medicare for all is going to work? Okay, and then basically, the public sector really doesn't have competition. So, and I can understand, well, healthcare is better that works on a nonprofit system. I prefer we go back to the system that we had in the 1960s, where costs were much, much lower. Very simple. People don't have to forcibly pay. I believe we can break up or manage or regulate the health insurance companies better. Maybe we should bring more competition in the private sector. Maybe we should have more people that don't have insurance and pay out of pocket, like myself. Because everybody's different. Not everybody has to forcibly pay into the system. All right? And there have been a lot of issues and flaws with the Medicare for all system happening in Europe. And they pay much higher taxes than we do. So, but again, if it happens, it's not like it's going to be something I'm going to get very pissed off and angry about. So, then another thing about her that I am really not a fan of, or I think it's kind of mediocre, is the idea of her plan for a $15 an hour minimum wage. Okay? Now, the issue with a $15 an hour minimum wage, first of all, is that not all businesses can do it. Some small businesses are going to get hurt. So if I were you, I would have a flexible system and say, hey, look, some businesses are going to be $10 and maybe some large box stores like Walmart can pay $15 an hour. But the whole idea of $15 an hour, the minimum wage, is really just meaningless. Now, of course, you did talk about, I believe you want to peg it to the CPI. That makes sense. But it doesn't solve the heart of the problem. And the main problem is our cost of living is going up. So you have to manage that. You have to stop the prices of whether it's housing, healthcare, and maybe some other things once in a while, food and fuel, from going up. That is what you need to do. You need cost of living control. Because if your minimum wage goes up and your cost of living rises just as much, what's the point? And speaking of minimum wage, I really don't think we really needed a minimum wage if we didn't have all these immigration, trade policies, union busting. And by the way, you haven't made a point about union busting or anything. And I do believe in private sector unions, although I do think many of them today are a joke. But when we had strongest union participation rate, we had a lesser share of income going to the top 1%. But what I believe that can really get to the issue is a maximum wage with a ratio. So therefore, a CEO cannot make more than 30 times the bottom employee. And the ratios are much lower in other industrialized countries. See, I think that will solve the heart of the issue. So this idea of a minimum wage, it really doesn't solve the heart of the problem. Okay? Although, I can understand $7.25 is not livable, and I think it's meant to go up. But depends on how much and what business. This idea of a jobs guarantee. Okay? Look, you got to understand why isn't the private sector working. You got to understand that why people can't start their own businesses. Maybe there's a lot of costs, there's a lot of regulations. This is one of the things the rights get it wrong. Get it right. Is that the fact is that they, believe it or not, they actually know that small businesses actually are struggling in many places with high regulations. So why don't we reform the private sector instead of this government idea of guaranteeing a job? Because how is that going to work, believe it or not? See, and of course I understand that government can employ and basically start up our infrastructure. But we didn't have this 50 years ago, and the average person was doing better. So maybe we can learn from that. Now, of course, you can argue FDR did some, but then again, did it really work? See, there's a lot of arguments and debate with that. Now, your idea of housing is a human right. Well, I understand that the housing system is flawed, but this idea that things are a right, like how much housing am I entitled to? Housing is a human right. So how do you decide? Now, speech is a human right, yes. But housing, like how much housing do I get? Is it a box? Is it a shack? Is it a studio apartment? And where is the housing going to be? I mean, look at myself. I just got this apartment here in southwest part of the Las Vegas Valley, and I didn't need any government assistance. I put some effort to my work. I'm only 25 years old. I make above the minimum wage. So, again, I think that maybe we should consider looking back at why housing is unaffordable in the first place. Maybe we can reform how the private sector works rather than, which I don't know what is it that you really want to do, subsidize housing, give people more Section 8, give people a public option. Now, you want to go after the wealthy developers and Wall Street cronies that are basically putting aside the bottom 80%, and I can understand that. But then again, you have to understand why housing is increasing in price. Now let's take a look at New York City. Maybe there are regulations. It's harder to build high-rise development, the permitting, the zoning, all these different things. Maybe it's the Wall Street speculation. Maybe it's the foreign buyers that's the problem. Maybe you have to tax them. You see, this is one of the things that you have to really understand. So there's a lot of other factors. Maybe there's a lot of NIMBY effects, zoning laws. The list just basically goes on. And then, of course, this is why immigration is important. Because if you keep bringing foreigners and you don't have enough housing supply, well then, why should you just keep bringing them? Well, then that's not good management. Then that's one of the causes of the shortages, believe it or not. So I believe that we should work together. Sure, we can have a public option, but we should make it easier for the sector to increase the supply. So that's one of the things that you have to really understand. So then let's go to her other issues. She talks about climate change, okay, that we need a renewable energy economy. Now, first of all, I'm not a scientist. I don't know personally if man is causing climate change. It's very hard to say. But I do know that I do not want policies that's been done in California that taxes people, increases the cost of living, of energy, gasoline. I really don't want that. And it does seem that when I see people like Al Gore and everybody else, it seems that they're trying to pump up this climate change agenda to fill their own pockets. Now, then again, who knows if it's man-made? The real issue is you want to bring in renewable energy, okay? Now, I have done a lot of studies, and I found out that renewable energy, many of them like wind and solar, cost a lot more than natural gas and coal. So how are we going to make this cost effective? Now, I believe it's very likely we do have cost-effective renewable energies, maybe geothermal, maybe some that haven't been brought into the market. But if your renewable energy plan is going to increase my energy costs, well, probably that's not the way to do it. But then again, I like people put solar in their farms, and I like an alternative to the big oil industry, all right? But of course, we have to work to energy efficiency as well. Now, this whole idea, another thing you talk about is free college, free tuition, okay? So, what's my take on that? Well, yes, it is true that back in the day, some places 40 years ago provided free tuition, or government covered something like 80% of the cost, and then the rules changed sometime in the 70s and 80s, and this is one of the reasons that tuition is rising higher. But again, some of that is because of government involvement. You have to understand the lending, the crediting, the standards that is required to graduate. There's a lot of different factors why we see that. Okay? You see, the thing is that one of the other reasons why we have tuition rates rising is also because the demand for colleges have gone up. Not to mention you got all these foreign kids. And why has the demand gone up? Because the increasingly employers requirement, and there are fewer good paying jobs. This is one of the consequences of outsourcing to China, that don't require a college degree. You see, what we need is, now, I just think that they should just lower the tuition, period. Just lower the tuition. Just mandate a lower tuition. That's it. Just keep things low cost. Now, sure, you can argue that the government is wasteful and we have the money to provide free college tuition, but I prefer people get low-cost services by themselves. We should just try that. But I do believe we have to reduce the demand for going to school. Now, of course, you do talk about trade schools. Sure, that's important, and some people do benefit. But a lot of people who are going to school, especially, nevertheless, really don't get much out of it. They don't really increase their productivity. So, and by the way, this student loan debt crisis has disproportionately affected women. So the real question is, are women overall better than they were 50 years ago? So this is one of the things. So reducing the demand for tuition is, and colleges is, I think, one of the things that you have to really keep in mind. Now, of course, let's talk about really the flaws of you and your campaign. And one of the things I really disagree. So you talk about equal pay for equal work. Well, let me give you some interesting statistics. Why is the gap between women pay and men pay higher in Wyoming and Alaska? Why are Uber drivers who are male making more than women? Is Uber discriminating? Why is the median wealth for single men much higher than women? About 3 times. What's discrimination? So, again, one of the things you have to understand that, speaking about Alaska and Wyoming, it really has a lot to do with the careers that they choose. Not to mention, biologically, there's a factor as well. So women take time off to take care of their children, and plus, women get affirmative action. Now, of course, one of the issues about you and your movement is that you seem to buy into this feminism, political correctness, affirmative action, double standards, thinking that basically discriminating or pushing whites aside, as well as Asians and people myself who are Iranian, thinking that that's social justice, okay? Which it really isn't. It's not really equal treatment. So this is one of the flaws. Now, of course, there are some flaws that you don't cover about the Democratic Party, which you don't talk about. And that, of course, is when you look at many of the places that they linger, states like California, New York, high taxes, especially for the bottom 80% of Americans, abusive public sector unions, although that's going to change with the Janus decision. And a lot of people are fleeing those states. They have welfare programs that create dependency. These are some of the things that you just don't talk about. And I think you should. Now, what is the major flaw of Alexandria, in my opinion? Her major flaw, believe it or not, is immigration. And immigration, I believe, is a very important issue, especially to myself. Now, one of the things about immigration and your policies is you want to abolish ICE. So, okay, somebody crosses in the country illegally, there should be no enforcement, I guess. Do you want open borders? Is that what you want? In this world that we live in, we can't have open borders. If every part of the world was like Japan and Sweden, it could work. But we can't. There's too many differences. And we have the right to screen people and know who these people are. Just like I have the right to know what food goes in my mouth. I go to Sprouts and nearly buy everything is organic. They have labels. We can see what's in the food. But what about MS-13? You think it's just lies? These people have to be thrown out of the country. So again, we have about 11 million non-legal immigrants, or aliens, what you want to call, and if you include their families who have better status and their children who are citizens, that number is probably about 20, 30 million. So you want to abolish ICE. But then again, just because if you abolish ICE does not mean that we cannot solve the problem. You see, this is one of the things. You have to understand, people can self-deport. You can do other things so these people could leave. If you enforce labor laws, E-Verify, if you go after employers, find them. You can actually have a lot of these people leave, believe it or not. So this is one of the things. So this again is one of the concerns that I have. And this is one of the things that you don't even talk about. So, and then of course you go after their benefits because their children getting them. So a lot of self-deportations can actually happen. So, then again, you don't talk about legal immigration, how much we should bring in. That's a problem. I don't want my country to look like China and India. That's a fact. We don't have good management of our population, incoming people coming in, and I just want to put American citizens first, period. And I don't want to make sure that immigrants are being brought in, used for gain, like people like Cortez Masto and Harry Reid and the state of California. I don't want that, okay? I want to put citizens first. And I believe we should reduce the number of green cards. Because here in Las Vegas, we have the Culinary Workers Union, and these foreign-born employees, what benefit are they offering us? They're not starting businesses, they're not bringing skills, they're just creating competition. So, and these are jobs that many young people like myself can do, and you can really raise wages with that. Now, lastly, about abortions and guns, look, the idea about banning them or stopping them, I think you just have to just educate the public, okay? I think women should be better informed about making their own decisions. I think that we have to look at the human conditioning, the pills, the mental problems, the family issues, the economy. Maybe mass shootings can lower down significantly. We had these guns in the 50s, but we had far less of them. Look at myself. There's a lot of casinos and gambling here. I don't gamble. Why is that? Because I'm well informed. So that's one of the things that you have to understand. Now, another issue about you is that you don't talk about some issues. I want to know your take about basic income. Of course, if you want to give citizenship to all these immigrants and they get basic income, how are we going to afford this? Are you going to raise my taxes? Now, there is a good excuse about basic income because of automation of labor and so forth. What's your issue about trade policies? Now, I'm sure you're against outsourcing, but what do you think about NAFTA, CAFTA, China trade, the new tariffs? What's your thoughts about that? And again, no mention about the public school system, about all these standards and how the inefficiency it is. So, again, thank you guys so much for tuning to this video. Again, I think she's a step forward, but she has some issues, and there are some things that she doesn't get, but I like to see some things shake up. Stay tuned for more videos. Thank you so much. Take care.